When my parents died, I thought I had lost everything. I hadn't just lost my mother and father, I had lost the bedrock of my life, the two people who had given me everything: love, stability, and purpose. I knew I had to carry on, for myself, for them, and for my family. My younger brother, Daniel, and I were the only ones left. I had always been the responsible one. I took on the responsibilities from a young age, helping my mother with the household when my father was working long hours. I gave up my own dreams, my own plans, so that I could be the one to keep things together. Daniel, on the other hand, had always been carefree. He was charming, spontaneous, and lived for the moment. We were opposites in so many ways, but I never minded. It was just how it was. He'd always come to me when things got hard, and I was always there to pick up the pieces. When our parents passed, Daniel and I were left with the house and their small fortune, which wasn't much but enough to ensure we could be okay. I thought we'd figure things out together, divide the inheritance, and settle the affairs without much fuss. But I had no idea how wrong I was. The first sign came when Daniel suggested we meet with the lawyer. I didn't think much of it, just another formality. When we sat in the lawyer's office, he handed us a document that would change my life forever. "Mr. Matthews, Daniel is the sole beneficiary of your parents' estate," the lawyer said, looking at me with a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "They made their wishes clear in the will." My head spun. What do you mean? The sole beneficiary? Daniel, sitting beside me, was calm, almost too calm. He looked at the lawyer, then at me, and smiled a smile I couldn't place. "It's all mine, Nathan," he said, as if it were no big deal. "You were never meant to inherit anything." I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't breathe. I looked at the lawyer, hoping there was some mistake, some misunderstanding. "This isn't possible," I said, my voice rising. "I was supposed to get half at least. I've been taking care of everything for years. I put my life on hold for this family. I deserve this." Daniel's smile widened. "You were always the one to take care of everything, Nathan. Always the responsible one. I thought it was time for you to learn a little lesson. The world isn't fair, and you were never going to get what you wanted. Not from them, not from me." I couldn't believe it. The money, the house, everything, my parents' entire legacy. It was all Daniel's. And the worst part, he didn't even seem to care. He had always been a little reckless, a little selfish. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I left the lawyer's office feeling like I had been punched in the gut. I walked out into the cold afternoon air, my mind racing, my heart broken. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. My brother, the one I had always protected, had taken everything that was meant for both of us, and walked away without a second thought. I tried to call him. I tried to reach out, to understand what had happened, but he ignored my calls. He laughed it off when we spoke, as if I were making a big deal out of nothing. "It's my inheritance, Nathan," he would say, dismissing me like I was an inconvenience. "Don't take it so personally. You've got your life. You'll be fine." But I wasn't fine. How could I be? In the weeks that followed, the weight of the betrayal sank deeper. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that the money didn't define me, that family was more important than anything material. But the truth was, it did matter. It mattered because Daniel hadn't just taken my share. He had taken everything my parents had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for, and now he was enjoying the fruits of that labor, while I was left with nothing but empty promises and shattered trust. I spent my days pacing the house, staring at the walls that used to be filled with laughter, memories, warmth. Now, they were cold and silent. I thought of all the years I had spent putting my dreams aside to take care of my family, the years I had sacrificed my own happiness to make sure they were okay. And for what? For nothing. For Daniel to walk away with everything and laugh in my face. I could have let it go. I could have walked away, accepted the injustice, and moved on. But the thought of Daniel getting away with it, the thought of him walking through life without consequences for what he had done to me and to our family, that thought burned deep in my chest. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him take everything without paying for it. And so, I made a decision. I would get it all back. It started small. I reached out to old contacts, friends of my father's, investors he had worked with over the years. I asked questions. I gathered information. I found out things about Daniel's business dealings, his ventures, his investments, things I had never cared to know before. But now, I had a reason to dig deeper. I didn't let the anger control me. I didn't let the betrayal blind me. I knew what I needed to do, and I did it with precision. I knew that to take everything back, I needed to play the long game. I needed to be smarter than Daniel. And slowly the pieces started to fall into place. I knew that the inheritance wasn't just money, it was power, control. And as much as Daniel thought he was untouchable, I knew that his greed, his arrogance, would eventually trip him up. One day, I received a tip from a business associate of my father's, someone who had known about Daniel's dealings but had never felt the need to speak up. The information was subtle at first, just small details, like how Daniel had taken advantage of his position to manipulate investments and hide assets. But with each new piece of information, I saw the full picture coming into focus. Daniel hadn't just taken my inheritance. He had built an empire of deceit. The plan began to form in my mind. I would go after his business, his real estate, his ventures, everything. I would use the very tools he had used to take from me to take it all back. Weeks passed, and the web of information grew tighter. I worked behind the scenes, my anger now replaced with a calm determination. I called in favors, met with investors, and quietly undermined Daniel's business with the evidence I had gathered. He didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in around him. I would take everything from him. With interest, the days after the will reading were a blur of shock and disbelief. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, sitting there in the lawyer's office, looking at the document that stated I was entitled to nothing. Nothing. My own brother had taken it all. The house, the savings, the investments, everything that was meant to be divided equally between us, was his. And in that moment, I realized I had been played. The lawyer had tried to explain. He had tried to soften the blow, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. My brother, Daniel, had stolen everything and walked away with a smug grin on his face, as if it were all just a game to him. He didn't even seem bothered by the fact that I had been left with nothing. He didn't care about the years I had spent taking care of our family, the sacrifices I had made so that he could live comfortably. All of it was gone in an instant. I left the lawyer's office without a word. I couldn't look at him, couldn't hear him try to explain the will any longer. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart breaking, the sound of betrayal echoing through my chest. The first few days after the betrayal were the hardest. I couldn't bring myself to go home. The house that had once been filled with laughter and love now felt like a tomb. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of the life I had worked so hard to build, and now, it was all gone. The walls, the furniture, the memories, I couldn't escape them. I stayed at a motel for the first few nights. I didn't want to be around anyone, didn't want to face the questions, but the isolation only made things worse. The loneliness crept in like a heavy fog, and I realized just how much of myself I had sacrificed for this family, how much I had given up to make sure they had what they needed. And yet, when the time came for them to give something back, they had turned their backs on me. I called Daniel over and over again, but he never answered. He sent a text once. "I don't want to talk, Nathan. It's over. Let it go. Let it go." That was it. Those 3 words, so simple, so final. He had taken everything, and now he wanted me to just walk away. But I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. I spent the next few days gathering my thoughts. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I had to fight back. Not just for the money, not just for the inheritance, but for my dignity, for the man I used to be. Daniel thought he could take everything from me, but he hadn't taken my will to fight. I called old friends, business associates, people I had helped over the years, and told them what had happened. Some were sympathetic, others were angry, but none of them could help me. This was a battle I would have to fight alone. I went back to the house eventually, though it felt like walking into a battlefield. Every room reminded me of the life that was now lost. The kitchen, where we had shared so many meals. The living room, where we had spent countless evenings watching television, laughing together. Now, it was all empty. It was as if the house itself had turned on me, mocking me for believing that I could keep it all together. I sat down at the kitchen table, trying to think clearly. What did I need to do? What was the next step? How could I get back what was rightfully mine? Then, as if out of nowhere, an idea began to form in my mind. It was small at first, a fleeting thought, but as I pieced it together, it began to make sense. If Daniel thought he could take everything from me without consequences, he was wrong. I had worked too hard, given up too much, to just let him walk away with everything. I wasn't going to let him win. The first step was to find out exactly what Daniel had done with the inheritance. I needed proof. I needed to understand what he had taken and where it had gone. I needed to find the cracks in his plan and expose them. I began with the house. I called the mortgage company, pretending to be interested in refinancing. I needed to know if any payments had been made after the will had been read, if Daniel had taken out loans or made any changes to the property. The answers came quickly. He had taken out a second mortgage, a large one. The house was no longer entirely his. That was the first break. Over the next few weeks, I kept digging. I visited the bank, pretending to be an interested party in the family estate, asking questions about the accounts and their history. I found that Daniel had already drained a significant portion of the savings account, transferring money into offshore accounts. The money had been laundered, hidden away in places no one would think to look. But I wasn't just anyone. I was the brother who had been left with nothing, and now I was using that as my advantage. I called in favors from old contacts, people who knew the financial systems, people who could help me track the money, expose the lies. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about taking back control, about making sure that Daniel paid for what he had done. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not at first. I couldn't risk word getting back to Daniel. I needed to stay under the radar until I had everything lined up. But each day, as I dug deeper, I felt a little stronger. The pieces were falling into place, and the plan I had formed was beginning to take shape. Daniel thought he could steal from me and walk away with a smile. He had no idea what he had awakened. I was not going to let him win. And as I looked through the documents I had gathered, his shady transactions, his hidden assets, the fraudulent loans, I knew one thing. I would take back everything he stole, with interest. The moment I realized I could fight back wasn't a grand revelation. It was a quiet decision. It wasn't about rage anymore, it was about taking control of my life, taking back what was rightfully mine. Daniel had stolen the inheritance, the house, the life I had worked so hard to build for my family. But he hadn't stolen my ability to rise from the ashes. I had spent years working behind the scenes, unnoticed, always in the background. Now, I was going to use everything I had learned over the years to my advantage. I was going to take back everything Daniel had taken from me and then some. I started by assembling a team. I wasn't going to go at this alone. I had learned the hard way that there were people out there who would help if I asked the right way. My first move was to contact a private investigator named George. He wasn't someone I knew personally, but I had a friend who had worked with him in the past, and George had a reputation for getting results. I explained the situation to him in broad strokes, not revealing too much but giving him enough to understand the scope of what had happened. His first question was simple. Do you want to go to the authorities, or do you want to take him down yourself? I thought about it for a second. The legal route would be a long and complicated process. Daniel had a good lawyer, someone who could tie us up in court for years, but that wasn't the kind of justice I wanted. I wanted him to feel the consequences immediately. I wanted him to understand that stealing from me was a mistake he would regret for the rest of his life. I want to take him down myself, I said. I want to expose him. I want him to lose everything. George smiled, and that was all the confirmation I needed. All right then, let's get started. The first part of the plan was the financial investigation. I had already uncovered some of Daniel's shady dealings, but I needed more concrete proof. George worked with a forensic accountant who specialized in tracking money. Together, they dug into the offshore accounts, the fraudulent loans, the hidden transfers Daniel had made over the years. What they found was staggering millions of dollars funneled into shell companies, fake contracts signed to cover up the truth, and the money from the inheritance slowly disappearing into places no one could trace. But they didn't just stop there. George and his team followed the money trail, eventually tracking it to a few luxury properties Daniel had purchased under his name and through companies he had set up. He had invested heavily in real estate, and now that money was all tied up in assets he couldn't easily access without selling them off. The more we dug, the more we found Daniel's empire wasn't just built on lies. It was built on greed. It wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the deceit. Daniel hadn't just taken what was mine. He had stolen my trust, my faith in family, and the one thing that I couldn't get back, time. But I was done being the victim. The second part of the plan was more personal. I started reaching out to people who had once been close to Daniel, friends, business associates, even old employees who had worked for him. I needed to gather testimonies to expose the full extent of his betrayal. The more I heard, the clearer it became. Daniel had always been manipulative, always used people to get ahead, never caring about who he stepped on along the way. But now, he had made the biggest mistake of all. He had stepped on me, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I met with one former employee, Lisa, who had worked for Daniel for several years before quitting. She told me everything, how Daniel had manipulated people into signing contracts that weren't in their best interest, how he had been skimming money from the company accounts for years, using his position to make shady deals that no one had questioned because they were afraid of him. Lisa had been too scared to speak out before, but now, with everything crumbling, she was ready to tell the truth. He thought he was untouchable, Lisa said, her voice trembling with anger. But you're the one who's going to bring him down, aren't you? I nodded. I am. The next move was the hardest. I knew that in order to take Daniel down, I had to hit him where it hurt the most, his business. It wasn't enough to expose his fraud. I needed to strip him of everything he had built. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own greed, to see everything he had worked for come crashing down around him. I gathered the evidence, the documents, the testimonies, the financial records, and presented it all to the board of directors at Daniel's company. They had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. They trusted him, believed in his leadership, but they hadn't seen the truth. Now, I was going to show them. I called an emergency meeting, one that would shake the foundation of everything Daniel had worked for. I stood in front of the board, calm but determined, and laid out the evidence. I didn't hold back. I showed them the money transfers, the offshore accounts, the fraudulent contracts. I told them about the lies Daniel had told them, the way he had manipulated them into thinking he was the golden boy. And I made sure they understood one thing. Daniel's actions weren't just illegal. They were a betrayal of everything the company stood for. The room was silent as they absorbed the information. It was clear that the board was shocked, angry, and betrayed. And then, in the midst of their panic, I dropped the final piece of the puzzle. Daniel Matthews, I said, was never meant to inherit this company. I was. He stole what was rightfully mine, and now, I'm taking it back. The aftermath was swift. The board convened, and within hours, they voted to remove Daniel as CEO. His empire, once a towering symbol of success, came crashing down like a house of cards. His assets were frozen. His luxury properties were seized. His accounts were emptied, and he was left with nothing, just the wreckage of the life he had stolen from me. When the news broke, the public was in shock. The company's once gilded reputation was tarnished, and Daniel's name became synonymous with greed and fraud. He tried to fight it, of course hiring expensive lawyers, making public statements, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and the truth had come out. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub his face in the dirt. That wasn't why I did this. I did it because he needed to know that no one could take what was mine and get away with it. I did it because, in the end, the person I had betrayed the most was myself. And now, I was reclaiming everything he had taken, not just from me, but from our family. As I sat in my new office, looking out at the city skyline, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't just a victory over Daniel. It was a victory over my own fears, my own doubts. I had taken back what was mine, with interest, and I had done it on my own terms. The months following Daniel's fall were a blur of negotiations, legal battles, and a growing sense of disbelief. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about restoring what had been broken, proving to myself that I could rebuild after everything had been taken from me. The company I had once been forced to watch from the sidelines was now mine, in every sense of the word. Daniel had thought that stripping me of my inheritance would be the end of me. He was wrong. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But even with all the progress, there was still a question lingering in the back of my mind. Was this the end of my struggle? Or was there still more to prove? I stood at the head of the boardroom table, looking at the same faces that had once been loyal to Daniel. But now, they were all mine. It wasn't the same feeling of dominance I had imagined. There were no cheers, no celebrations. The shift had been too abrupt, too messy. But as I looked around the room, I saw something new in their eyes: respect. The investors who had once backed Daniel were now backing me. They saw what I had done with the company. They saw how it had flourished under my leadership. But more than that, they saw the integrity I had built it on. They saw a future. I was no longer the man who had been left behind. I was the man who had reclaimed his place. I had done more than rise from the ashes. I had built something solid from them, but the struggle wasn't over. I knew that taking control of the company and rebuilding it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for me to just take back what was mine. I needed to restore my name, to repair the relationships that had been damaged by Daniel's lies, and that meant confronting my past. I reached out to the people I had once worked with, old colleagues, friends who had watched my downfall. I needed to show them that I wasn't the man who had been abandoned and humiliated. I needed to show them that I was still the man they had respected all those years ago. At first, I wasn't sure they would respond. The reputation Daniel had spread about me was still out there, lingering like a shadow. But one by one, they came around. They came to the office. They sat with me. They listened. And slowly, the doubts began to clear. It wasn't easy. Some people took longer than others to forgive me for the mistakes I had made during my lowest moments. Some of them, I realized, had their own battles to fight. But as the months went by, I could see the change in their eyes. They saw the man I had become, not the man I had been. Anna never came back. At first, I was angry. I couldn't understand why she had chosen Richard over me, why she had thrown away everything we had built for something shiny, something false. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had learned something from our marriage. It wasn't about the things we owned or the titles we held. It was about the choices we made. And Anna had made her choice. I had to accept that, and in accepting it, I realized I was free. Free from the anger that had held me hostage for so long. Free from the guilt of believing I had done something wrong. I had sacrificed everything for her and for my family, but in the end, I had been the one left standing. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. One evening, after another long day in the office, I received a call. It was from Daniel. I hadn't heard from him since the day the company had voted him out. "Hello?" I said, unsure of what to expect. "Thomas." Daniel's voice crackled over the line, a mixture of anger and desperation in his tone. "I know I've made mistakes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I didn't mean for it to go this far." I wasn't surprised by his call, but I was curious. After everything he had done, after everything he had taken from me, why was he suddenly reaching out? "I don't want your apology, Daniel," I said, my voice steady. "What you did can't be undone. But you need to understand this. You can't destroy people and expect them to stay down. I've rebuilt myself, and I'll continue to rise. But you'll never have what I have. You'll never understand what it means to build something with integrity." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up, but instead, he spoke again, quieter this time. "I see that now," he said, almost to himself. "I see that now." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession, but it was enough. It was the acknowledgement I had been waiting for, even if it had come too late. By the time the year ended, everything had changed. The company I had worked so hard to save was not just surviving, it was thriving. We were making profits, expanding, and most importantly, building a reputation that was built on honesty and hard work. I still thought about Anna from time to time. I still wondered if I had missed something, if I had been wrong to let her go. But those thoughts didn't control me anymore. I had let go of the past, and I had learned to move forward. The hardest part, I realized, wasn't rebuilding the company or reclaiming what was mine. It was rebuilding myself. The man I had been before was gone, and in his place was someone stronger, more focused, and more at peace than I had ever been. I didn't need Anna's forgiveness. I didn't need Daniel's apology. I had proven to myself that I could rise above it all. I had rebuilt not just a business, but a life, and that, more than anything, was the victory I would carry with me for the rest of my days. The night of the gala arrived, and with it came the culmination of everything I had worked for. The room was filled with people I had once seen as untouchable investors, media, business elites, people who had once looked down on me, treated me as nothing more than a pawn in the game they played. Tonight, however, the roles would be reversed. Tonight, I was the one who held the power. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel glittered with expensive chandeliers, the floor polished to perfection, the scent of expensive cologne, mixed with the chatter of high society. At the front of the room, Richard Lane stood in front of a microphone, smiling, charismatic as ever. He had no idea what was about to happen. I stood across the room, my hand in my pocket, the small folder I had prepared clenched in my grip. Inside it was the evidence, the proof that Richard Lane had built his fortune on lies, deceit, and fraud. It wasn't just about the inheritance he had taken from me. It was about everything he had done to everyone around him, every person he had used to climb higher. The moment came. Richard had just finished giving his speech, promising even greater success for his company, when I made my move. I rose from my seat, walking steadily toward the front of the room. The whispers began almost immediately. People looked at me, confused, curious. Richard didn't see me at first, too caught up in the moment, too full of his own importance. But when I stepped up to the stage, his smile faltered. The mic squealed as I tapped it once, then spoke calmly but with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, the crowd silencing itself as all eyes turned toward me. "You've all heard the promises, the successes, the vision Richard Lane has shared with you. But tonight, I'm here to show you the truth." Gasps filled the room. Richard's face paled. He stepped back, trying to regain his composure, but it was too late. I had already begun. I threw the folder onto the stage, and the documents spilled out bank statements, wire transfers, contracts. The crowd began to murmur, their confusion turning to shock as they realized what was happening. I took a step back and let the evidence do the talking. "Richard Lane," I continued, my voice steady and strong, "has been embezzling money, funneling it into offshore accounts, hiding assets, and manipulating the very people in this room. He built his empire on lies, and I have the proof." Richard's face twisted in anger. He moved toward me, but I held up my hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't try to deny it, Richard. It's all here, for everyone to see." He sputtered, trying to regain his composure. "This is slander. This is—" "No, Richard," I said, cutting him off. "This is the truth. And now, everyone will know." The room erupted into chaos. Phones were pulled out. People rushed to the front, trying to get a glimpse of the documents. The media, once so eager to kiss Richard's feet, now turned on him, their cameras capturing every second of his downfall. As I stood there, watching Richard's world crumble, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the money. It was about justice. It was about taking back what had been stolen from me, my dignity, my future, and everything I had worked for. I didn't move from the stage. I didn't need to. The truth was doing all the work for me. Richard's smirk was gone, replaced by panic. He tried to speak, to deny the evidence, but the room wasn't listening anymore. His supporters had turned on him. The investors, once loyal, were now questioning their decisions. The press, once captivated by his charm, now recorded his every faltering word. As the police arrived, ushering him away, I watched with a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about watching him suffer. It was about making sure that he couldn't hurt anyone else. His empire was finished, and so was his reign of manipulation. The aftermath was swift. Richard's company was seized by the authorities. His assets were frozen. His wealth, built on lies and deception, was now worthless. He was arrested for fraud, embezzlement, and a dozen other crimes. His once impressive reputation was destroyed in a matter of hours. But for me, the real victory was something different. It wasn't the fall of a man who had wronged me. It was the rise of a new beginning. I had always worked in the shadows, quietly, consistently, doing my job without fanfare. Now, standing in the light, I realized that I didn't need to prove myself to anyone anymore. I had done it for me. A few weeks after the gala, I stood in my new office, overlooking the city I had once thought I could never reach. The phone rang, and I answered it without hesitation. "David," Martin's voice came through. "We did it. It's all done. The company's ours now." I smiled, the weight of everything I had accomplished settling in. "It's not just ours, Martin. It's ours because we earned it. We did it the right way. We couldn't have done it without you, David. Without your vision, your strategy, we wouldn't be here." I chuckled softly. "I think we both know it was a team effort. But it's done now. It's time to move forward." I looked out the window again, at the city spread out before me. The world was mine, and this time, it was because I had built it with my own hands. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I had already proven it to myself. The day after Richard's arrest, the world felt different. The city buzzed with news of his fall, and I could feel the shift in the air. The same people who had once dismissed me, who had whispered behind my back and laughed at my expense, now looked at me with newfound respect. But the truth was, it wasn't the respect that mattered. It was the satisfaction of knowing that I had taken control of my own destiny. I had built something from the ground up, brick by brick, with nothing but my own hands. The company was thriving, and I was no longer the man who had been cast aside. I wasn't just taking back what was mine, I was proving that I could rise higher than they ever thought possible. The phone calls came in waves. Business partners congratulated me on my success. Lawyers called to discuss the final steps of clearing out Richard's name and securing the future of the company. And, inevitably, Anna reached out. Her calls came sporadically at first, short messages asking to talk, to explain. The guilt in her words was palpable. But I didn't respond. I didn't need closure from her. What I needed was to close the door on that chapter of my life once and for all. But one evening, as I sat in my office, the phone buzzed with a familiar number. It was Anna. My first instinct was to ignore it, but then I realized something. I had already moved on. I had already won. I picked up the phone, and for the first time in months, I heard her voice tentative, uncertain. "Thomas," she said quietly, "I know you probably hate me, but I need to talk. I need to explain everything." I leaned back in my chair looking out at the city skyline. For a moment I was tempted to hang up, to let the silence speak louder than any words she could offer. But then I realized this wasn't about her. It was about me. And I didn't need to walk away from this conversation with anything other than the peace I had already earned. "I don't hate you, Anna," I said calmly, my voice steady. "I don't even resent you anymore. But I've let go of that life. I've built something for myself, and I don't need you to be a part of it." Her silence on the other end was heavy. I could almost hear the weight of regret in her pause. "I understand," she finally whispered. "I made a mistake. I was blinded by ambition, and I didn't see what I had until it was too late. I lost everything, Thomas, and I know I can never get it back." I could feel the ache of her words, but they didn't wound me like they once would have. Instead, I felt something different, a quiet strength that had been forged in the fire of everything she had taken from me. "You made your choice, Anna," I said, "and I made mine. I'm not the man I was before. I've moved on, and I've built a future that doesn't need you in it." There was another long pause, and for a moment, I thought she might try to apologize again, to beg for forgiveness. But I wasn't looking for that anymore. I had learned to forgive myself first. "I'm sorry, Thomas," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I hope you find peace. You deserve it." "I already have," I replied, ending the call. The following weeks were filled with work, with progress, with the steady march toward something bigger, something real. The company continued to grow, and I continued to pour myself into it not because I needed to prove anything, but because I had found a new purpose. I spent more time with Martin, refining our strategies, expanding our reach, making sure that every step we took was in the right direction. I wasn't in a hurry anymore. I was building something that would last not just for me, but for the people who believed in me. And in that process, I found peace. The bitterness I had once held toward Anna, toward Richard, began to fade. I realized that what I had lost was never meant to define me. It was what I had gained: the lessons, the resilience, the ability to rise from nothing that mattered most. One evening, I stood by the window in my office, looking out at the city I had once thought I could never conquer. The lights twinkled like stars below, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel lost. I felt grounded, secure, and, most importantly, free. I had built this from the ground up. I had taken everything that had been stolen from me and turned it into something greater. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Charles Whitman, the investor who had believed in me from the start. "We've got the next big deal lined up. This could be the one that makes us unstoppable." I smiled as I read the message, my heart swelling with a quiet pride. I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was shaping the future. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of all my sacrifices settle into a sense of peace. I had found my place, not in the shadows of the life I had lost, but in the bright light of the future I was creating. I didn't need Anna's forgiveness. I didn't need Richard's approval. I had done it. I had rebuilt, not just my business, but my entire life. And as I looked out at the city, I knew one thing. I was no longer the man who had been left behind. I was the man who had risen higher than they ever imagined. And that was all I needed.